The prayer of St. Francis is one of Christianity's most beloved prayers. But did you know that the prayer of St. Francis wasn't originally called the prayer of St. Francis and wasn't written in Latin or Italian? It wasn't even written by St. Francis of Assisi or anybody named Francis for that matter. The prayer was first published in 1912 in France in a spiritual magazine called La Cochette, or The Little Bell. The magazine was published by a Catholic group called the Holy Mass League, established by Father Esther Bucarel in 1901. In the version published by La Cochette, the prayer was entitled A Beautiful Prayer to Say During the Mass. Since it was published anonymously, the original author is not known. Possibly Father Bucarel himself could have written the prayer. Eventually, in 1915, the prayer was sent to Pope Benedict XV, still written in the original French. A year later, in 1916, it appeared in the daily newspaper of the Vatican and was then written in Italian. Later on, around 1920, a French Franciscan priest printed the prayer on the back of a prayer card. On the front of the prayer card was the image of, you guessed it, St. Francis of Assisi. But it was still not attributed to St. Francis. The first time it was attributed to him was in 1927 by a French Protestant group called the Knights of the Prince of Peace. Between the two world wars, the prayer made its way through Europe, eventually being translated into English. The first known English translation appeared in a book entitled Living Courageously, written by Kirby Page. Since then, we've known this beloved prayer as the prayer of St. Francis. And even though we don't know who the writer of this prayer was, it's still a deeply moving and beautiful prayer to pray and to practice. One other thing before we get to the first line. There will be some surprises along the way as we translate a few words from the original French to English. One big surprise is that the English version leaves out an entire line of the original prayer. I might cover that in a bonus video at the end of the series. So let's dive in. The author of the prayer asks God to make him an instrument of God's peace. It makes us ask, what does God's peace look like? And how can we spread God's peace? Fortunately, the author answers our question with 6 examples of real-life circumstances. The first is, where there is hatred, let me sow love. In the French, the line is, where there is hatred, let me put love. Perhaps it's a small difference, but it might be a meaningful difference. If I sow a seed, I may or may not be the one responsible for seeing that the seed grows and matures and becomes fruitful. If I sow love, that may just be a temporary act, but the French word for put implies to replace. Where there is hate, let me replace that hatred with love. And with hate, a single act is usually not enough to replace hate with love. Proverbs 10:12 says that hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. The first few words of Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1 says, a soft answer turns away wrath. As we look around the world, there's an awful lot of hating going on. There's an awful lot of name-calling, lies, misinformation, prejudice, and violence. I get it. People feel frustrated, helpless, powerless victims of some kind of evil incarnated in the people who seem to have more power and control. We live in a time where nearly every issue becomes inflated as a war between the forces of good and the forces of evil, and we feel like we need an army to destroy those whom we perceive as threats to us. Let's be the exception. Where there is hating going on, let's replace it with love. And perhaps there is nowhere better to begin that practice than within our own selves. This week, I'm asking you to do a spiritual self-examination of your own heart and mind. Where are you hating? Where are you name calling and harboring resentment or anger? Then I ask you to name those places of hating and to replace that hating with love.